Because alcohol has been with us for many generations, alcoholism is the only addiction which is known to be at least partly inherited.
My grandfather was a heavy drinker, and I was told that my father was a heavy drinker, but I don't know. My mother and father separated when I was about 4.5 years old. The first time I drank a fifth of whiskey, and I really liked it, you know, the high, the giggles, and just enjoyed it. On the way home, I got sick, and I didn't care too much for that, you know, and I thought, this is crazy. But then again, the very next night, I done the same thing. You know, I can look back on this experience now, you know, and I knew that I drank alcoholically from the start.
Al has a type of alcoholism that seems to be passed from father to son. The drinking starts young and goes with antisocial behavior.
I came home one day and opened a can of beer and sat down on the couch, and my son was about 4.5 years old at the time, and he walked up to me and he says, "Gosh, Daddy, you sure drink an awful lot of beer." You know, and it made me a little angry, you know, but after I thought about it for a while, you know, he just made me aware that I did have a problem with alcohol that I'd been denying.
Is there any way to find out if the child of an alcoholic has inherited a parent's susceptibility? Recently, Al came to Brooklyn to take a new kind of test. Henri Begleiter studies brain deficits in alcoholics.
There are a number of deficits. In fact, one of the most remarkable findings of our long-term investigations is the fact that we found deficits almost every place we looked. We found sensory deficits. We found the deficits in very primitive areas of the brain, such as the brainstem, for instance. And more recently, in the last 10 years, we have uncovered a number of deficits in abstinent alcoholics in cognition.
The technique for attaching electrodes to his scalp is quite painless. Al hasn't had a drink for 6 years, but will the test still reveal abnormalities in his brain?
I'm Dr. Begleiter.
All right, sir.
How are you today?
All right.
All right. We're going to see if we can test you. If you'll accompany us to the chamber here.
I get to press this button whenever you hear the low tone.
The one on the left.
Yes. Okay? Can I put the headphones on you?
Al's behavior seems normal, but Begleiter's test will show if Al's brain fails to respond normally to new stimuli, changed sounds or changed angles. In normal people, unexpected sounds or images evoke special brain waves called P3, often missing in alcoholics. Will Al's brain show the telltale deficit? Computer analysis isolates the P3 waves in brain cross-sections.
On this side, we have enlarged the display of the normal control. And what you see here is a rather large area which indicates that P3 is very strong in voltage in this normal control. This is manifested by this large red spot which is located toward the back of the head. On the other hand, if you look at the topogram which we obtained from Al, you can see that the P3 is totally absent in this area of the brain. Indeed, you can see the difference is rather striking between the P3 distribution here and the absence of any P3 voltage on this side.
And the crucial question, is this the effect of years of alcohol or the sign of a true genetic trait? Begleiter's team has been testing young boys who probably have never had a drink.
Keep your eyes focused straight ahead.
This boy's brain shows no P3 deficit, but he doesn't have alcoholic parents. Now a boy who does have an alcoholic father. The P3 is missing, just as in Al's brain.
Our hope is that this deficit can be construed as a valid and reliable biological marker for subsequent alcohol abuse.
So some children can now be warned of the special risk they may run if they start drinking, the risk of addiction.
Begleiter and his team published this research in 1984. Since then, he and his colleague, Dr. Bernice Porches, as well as other researchers, have confirmed and extended their findings. These topographical maps of brain activity show the control subject on the right and the alcoholic on the left.
Since that time, there have been about 30, 40, maybe even possibly 50 publications replicating the work that we had initially reported in 1984. We have been pursuing that, and since that time, we ourselves have had the opportunity of replicating that finding on numerous occasions. And as a result of these replications, which we found to be quite encouraging, we then initiated and implemented simultaneously a large genetic research collaboration, which involves 6 different sites across the country, as well as 11 international sites. And what we did was, for the national sites, the 6 national sites, which in fact go from East Coast to West Coast, we established identical laboratories. They are totally identical in every respect, and have now looked at large families, collecting lots of different neurophysiological data, which these are brain waves, of course, as well as DNA, blood extracted from DNA, and most of all, a great deal of clinical information. We interview each individual subject in a family at great length. We collect lots of important clinical data, and when we put all of that together, we have a much better picture of what a family of alcoholics with several alcoholics does look like. We now know that this has high predictability. That is to say, if we can identify a young individual, be it male or female, who manifests this particular deficit, and we can then follow this individual for a number of years, it has high predictability. Other people have done this work at 2 different universities. One is at UCLA, the other one is at Pittsburgh. And this is also published material in which they report that having identified those deficits in young kids and having followed these kids for about 10 years, it turns out that those who have the deficit also go on to abuse alcohol or other drugs. What is also interesting to note is that all of these neurophysiological features or measures which we take are highly heritable. So we have undertaken a major project looking not just at the heritability of these neurophysiological indices, but also trying to identify genetic loci. We've collected DNA on all these individuals, and we have finished what is called in genetics a linkage analysis. And what we have is something which is currently in press, a paper that we wrote, which is currently in press, in which we report that there are very specific genetic loci which are in fact associated with these neurophysiological features. Now, what is even more interesting than all of that is that we have in addition found genetic loci which seem to be protective factors in non-affected individuals from the same family. So this is probably one of the few times in the history of genetics of complex disorders where protective factors have actually been identified.
The work of Begleiter and his colleagues has greatly increased our understanding of the nature of alcoholism as a disease. But like many complex disorders, alcoholism also depends on environmental factors.
What we are looking at is the genetics of a predisposition, not the genetics of an illness. And the environment plays a tremendous role. What we think this predisposition relates to is a neurophysiological disinhibition, where individuals at risk are unable to differentially inhibit things that they should not respond to and only respond to things that are relevant to what they're indeed doing in a task. And what we've noticed is that in both alcoholics and in individuals at risk, their response is more diffuse. They respond more similarly to irrelevant information, they respond and relevant information than control subjects do. Control subjects tend to, or healthy individuals tend to respond when they should be responding and know how to inhibit the responses to the extraneous information. In an individual who's at risk, alcoholism is but one outcome. But in fact, these are disinhibited individuals who tend to over-respond and perhaps are in a state of hyperexcitability where alcohol is one mode of medicating themselves and feeling more, quote, normal under the influence of alcohol.